Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/I Merciless Void. The time I saw a Wendigo. First things first, this happened to me when I was around 10. I've lived in Idaho all my life and spent a lot of time outside or in the wilderness as a kid. My grandparents would take me camping and my older brother and I would always hike up whatever trails we could find to get a view of the sunset. On one of these occasions, something terrifying happened. We were up at a campsite I only know as Warm River, the river there never freezes over, and my brother and I were on a regular evening hike. There was an old tunnel bored through the mountain at one part of the trail, probably an old train tunnel, and we were walking through it when I heard something I'll never forget. After walking through probably 2/3 of the way through the tunnel, I heard a terrible screech at the end we entered through. The screech wasn't like anything I've heard before. I've heard the screams of animals on dark and windy nights. I even think I've heard Bigfoot calls a few times, but never the metallic, grinding screech I heard that day. The point is, whatever the sound was, it did not sound natural in any capacity. I probably jumped 5 feet in the air when I heard it, and my brother shouted a few choice curses before shooing me quickly to the exit of the tunnel. At this point, my brother decided we should just continue walking and head back after whatever made the noise hopefully cleared out. We didn't have any firearms on us, so I was pretty upset. My brother reassured me we would be fine, and we made the walk back without incident. However, I didn't get any sleep that night. Whether it was the thing that screeched at us or just my imagination, I heard things moving around the campsite the whole night, as well as whispers echoing through the darkness outside the trailer. I woke my brother up a few times to check out what it was, but he refused each time, telling me that it was probably just other campers staying up late and enjoying themselves. The rest of the trip was pretty normal. We packed up the following day and my life continued as normal. I was disconcerted but chalked what happened up as a harmless event that I must have been exaggerating in retrospect. A few weeks later I went up to Pine Basin, an old ski lodge my family rented each year for family reunions. Here I would mess around with my cousins, our favorite activities being night games. We would play hide and seek, a game called Ghosts in the Graveyard, and other games like that. On one instance, I was chosen to be the seeker for a hide and seek game. Because I was one of the younger cousin, I got a flashlight as an advantage. Normally, all the younger cousins hid close to the lodge and the older cousins hid in the nearby trees or at the base of the nearby mountain. As I was searching near the bottom of the mountain, I heard a familiar whistle up the mountain a bit. We would always whistle as a hint at our locations. It sounded like someone was hiding way up near a tree known as the underwear tree. You can guess why, so I began trekking up toward the whistle. As I climbed closer, I got an uneasy feeling in my stomach. I continued on wearily, and convinced myself that I would be fine. I hated walking in the night alone, but figured whoever I find would walk me back to the lodge. As I neared the tree, I noticed that it was deathly silent. This alerted me that something was very wrong, because you could always hear the adults having fun back at the lodge. I was anxious to hurry back, so I called out, "I found you, Scott." I thought the whistle was my older cousins. "Come back down with me." I got no reply, but I wasn't planning on waiting. As I began walking back down the path, I heard a voice call, "You almost had me," so I ran back up to investigate. I flashed my light in the branches of the tree, and saw a monstrosity that was not my cousin. It looked like a poorly drawn stick figure made into a human with its emaciated figure and lifeless eyes. I remember its face looked like the skin on its head was being pulled from behind. It had torn and stretched features. As soon as I saw the creature I screamed, dropped the flashlight, and ran back to the lodge. The entire time I ran I was overcome by an overpowering smell and I could hear the thing running after me. As I approached the camp I saw a few people, my cousins, at the bottom of the mountain waiting for me. I was crying and shaking and they took me inside. I told my dad what happened, but my cousins all said they didn't see anything following me. The adults kept us inside for the night, and I kept hearing sounds drifting in from the mountains. I never played night games after that happened, and was always terrified that my cousins wouldn't listen to my warnings. Ever since that night I have always felt uneasy up in those mountains. I used to be really religious and figured it was a demon of some kind trying to kill me or something like that, but those mountains have never felt the same after that incident. A few years ago the game, Until Dawn, became really popular and I watched a walkthrough of it on YouTube. When the Wendigo first appeared in game, I got chills down my spine. It was exactly what I saw, and I did a ton of research on them. I figure someone must have gotten snowed in at that old lodge and resorted to cannibalism, but that doesn't explain what happened at Warm River. I still hear that screech from time to time. It never occurred to me until watching Until Dawn that they might be from the same thing, and it scares the hell out of me every time. I heard it earlier tonight, and that's why I decided to finally write my story down. Wish me luck. Second story. This story was shared by you/Sleepless from Sundown. An encounter with a Wendigo. At 1 minute to midnight I took out the shot glass and put it beside the bottle of Jägermeister. I don't drink anymore after what happened to Pop. The one exception is the first day of September. The house is dark except for the warm glow of the 3 bulbs above the dining room table. I rub my tongue against the inside of my cheek. My mouth always goes dry. The only sound is the incessant ticking of the wall-mounted clock. At midnight the soft bell sounds, a miniature version of church bells. I fill the glass and hold it aloft for a second and swallow with a deep breath. The subtle burn wins its way into my throat and stomach. I wash the shot glass by the light of the moon shining through the kitchen window. Loretta wouldn't mind my drinking, but a used shot glass beside the sink raises questions. And I never like to talk about it. All these years later I still have nightmares. What I saw up on that mountain left a greater impression than any other event in my life. More than my children being born and my father drinking himself into an early grave. Loretta tells me I should talk about it. That it would help. She might be right. She always is. So here goes. I joined the park ranger service right out of school and it was a perfect fit. I took to academics like a fish to the desert and the outdoors always called. I passed my time in school daydreaming of the weekend and hiking or fly fishing with Pop. In the summer of '89, I was stationed in the Appalachians. Our jurisdiction encompassed trails leading all the way up the mountain. Up there the spruce thin out and clouds hang heavy even in fine weather at the base. I spent the summer clearing fallen branches from the walking trails after a couple of vicious storms over the winter. It was hack work reserved for the junior, but the truth of it was I didn't mind. The peak of the summer heat was spent and visitor numbers dropped as the weather began to turn. Persistent drizzle had kept me desk-bound for the morning and we were about to get lunch when he burst through the door. He let out a moan and collapsed to the floor. Stanley leaned down and propped him in a seated position. Water dripped from his shoulder-length hair. His limbs hung limp by his side. I handed Stanley a cup of water. Stanley used his index finger to push down his chin. When the water hit his tongue the man tensed and his eyelids flicked open. He flailed his limbs and knocked the glass from Stanley's hand. The glass shattered on the floor, but the man paid it no mind. "It is out there," he said. "What is?" The man half turned and gripped Stanley's shirt and made balls with his fists. He repeated himself, pausing after each word. "It is out there." He started to sob. He released his grip on Stanley and buried his face in his hands. We lifted him onto a chair and he pressed his face against the table and bawled. I grabbed the rucksack he had dropped to the floor. On the bottom right was a name tag behind a plastic sleeve. Lenny Porter from San Diego. There was a number at the bottom. "I'll make the call," Stanley said. When Stanley returned, Lenny was sat up staring blankly at the wall with red eyes. His face was gaunt, like he hadn't eaten in a week. Stanley closed the door. "I spoke to your father." Lenny didn't acknowledge the words. He sat motionless and unblinking. Stanley shuffled across to where I was sitting and pressed his palms on the table. Lenny left San Diego 2 weeks ago with a couple of friends. They planned to spend a month hiking the trail north. The father gave me 2 names: Freddie and Sabrina. When he heard their names, Lenny leaned over and picked up his backpack. He rummaged frantically until he pulled out a stack of Polaroids. He flicked through the photographs and then slapped one on the table. Stanley and I leaned over. Flanking a fitter and healthier Lenny were what must have been Freddie, tall and wearing a baseball cap, and Sabrina, shorter and wearing a bright yellow top with an almost fluorescent blue belt pulling the fabric tight around her waist. Lenny fingered the photo and tears welled in his eyes. "What happened to them?" He sobbed and shook his head. He opened his mouth to speak but no words came out. Stanley took a map down from the wall and pushed it in front of Lenny. "We are here. Where did you last see them?" Lenny blinked away tears and concentrated. He squinted at the map and pressed his index finger down and tapped it. Stanley took a pencil from his breast pocket and marked the map with a cross. "I'll notify the police. Get the truck ready to go." During training they told us about search and rescue operations. The Rangers are the first responders. It was part of the job. Twisted ankles and wandering off the trail and getting lost are not uncommon and no reason to get the police involved. But this felt different. I secured the gear in the truck and Stanley appeared, flanked by a police officer in his early 30s. "Harry is hitching a ride. His partner will take care of Lenny." We drove up the trail for about 15 minutes with the truck until it grew too narrow and treacherous. We split up the gear between us and set out on foot. Our destination was high up the mountain and far away from the trails. It was almost as if the trails deliberately avoided the area. We hacked our way through the thick forest. How had they ended up all the way out here? Stanley checked his watch constantly as we climbed. He wanted to get there before dark. I figured we would be lucky if we did. Stanley and Harry talked like old friends, asking about each other's wives and children. The park rangers are in effect an extension of law enforcement. It made sense to be friendly with the police, and living in a small mountain town made it almost inevitable. I liked that. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Stanley checked the map. "Almost there. Get your torches." "All right." Harry reached into his backpack and pulled out a flashlight. I did the same. "Do you know what's up this way?" Stanley said. I shook my head. "Somewhere up here is an old cabin. Hunters used it as a base back when you could still hunt up this way." The cross our friend Lenny put on the map is just about on top of it. Let's see if we can get there before there's no light left. We didn't make it by dark. Twilight gave to night with little warning. Soon we were relying on the light from our torches. Being on a trail in the sunshine lends a sense of security up here, even when you are alone. Now, surrounded by black and with the trail long behind us, an uneasiness grew in my stomach for the first time. Stanley paused and swept his torch. He muttered something under his breath. Harry took a few steps to the right, lowering his head and squinting. "There it is," he said. At the farthest reaches of Harry's torchlight the cabin emerged from the woods. Stanley tapped Harry on the shoulder. "My eyes aren't what they used to be." The cabin should have been a source of comfort, but it only added to my unease. The roof was half caved in and trees encroached on all sides, gnarled branches reaching out like fingers. The structure looked like it belonged more to the forest than to man. The only door hung askew on warped and rusted hinges. 2 windows had long ago lost their glass. Stanley shouldered open the door with a grunt. Leaves and branches covered the floor, blown in through the open windows and roof. We dumped the gear inside. Stanley took out a lantern and tied it to a horizontal branch a few paces from the front door. He flicked it on and the light shone bright. If there was anyone lost nearby they could not fail to see it. We split up and entered the forest, guided by our torches. Stanley instructed us to go no further than the reach of the lantern. It was our lighthouse on the horizon. The wind blew in fresh from the north. I buttoned up my jacket against the cold. The beam from the torch was strong, but aside from the narrow cone of light, the forest was a deep and full dark. Stanley and Harry called out the names of the 2 missing, Freddie and Sabrina. I did the same. Every few steps I stopped and listened. The forest was alive with the scurrying of animals and insects going about their business. And the constant rustling of the wind through the leaves. It was hopeless. This was needle in the haystack stuff. Freddie or Sabrina could be unconscious on the ground a few feet to my left and I would never see them. We should camp and wait for first light. Harry's voice cut through the night, louder and with urgency. I skipped towards the sound as fast as I dared. The 2 torchlights of Harry and Stanley played close together, the beams of light trained on the forest floor. "You might not want to see this," Stanley said as I came up behind them. It was too late. By the light of the torches I saw him. Flat on his back, arms and legs bent at unnatural angles. I almost gagged when I saw his face. The left side caved in, a red, bloody mess fragmented with the white of the skull. The right side was intact, one green eye staring up, wide and unblinking. The remainder of the face had an almost serene expression. It was not the look of fear that you would expect from someone about to have half their face crushed. No skin remained below the neck, the contents of his torso picked so clean I could see his full spine. "What did that?" I stammered. I didn't get an answer. Stanley fished the Polaroid from his pocket and studied it under the torchlight. He handed it to Harry. "It's him. It's Freddie." Harry jumped and swung his torch out into the woods. "I swear I heard someone talking out there," Harry said. "We've been calling out their names too." "No, it wasn't that. It sounded like whispering. It's the wind through the trees." Harry didn't look convinced. He called out the name of Sabrina and listened. Only the sounds of the forest. Stanley shushed him. "There's nothing we can do for the boy now. Let's get back to the cabin and radioed down the news. Stanley took a few quick steps towards the cabin and motioned for us to follow. He seemed agitated. I didn't blame him. I followed on his heels. Harry lingered, searching the woods with his torch until he too fell in behind. The inside of the cabin felt like a sanctuary. Out of the wind and removed from the mangled corpse of Freddy, my mind processed the sight. I had gutted my fair share of fish, but this was different. I put my hand to my stomach and swallowed hard. I was overcome with a compulsion to repeat my unanswered question. What could have done that? Before I could, Harry gave us some more bad news. There was no response on the radio, only static. It wasn't surprising. The cabin sat in a depression between the peak we crested on our way in and the taller peak beyond. We have to go back, I said. Harry shook his head. Not in the dark and not when there's someone still out there. We don't know if that girl is dead or alive, Stanley said. I heard her. You heard a whisper is what you said. And if she was there she would have come to the light. She'll come to the lantern and we'll wait for her. Harry threw out his arms in protest. Stanley sighed. If she's dead then we'll find her in the light of morning. If she's alive and nearby enough to whisper in our ears then she'll come to us. Two rectangles of light shone through the open windows from the lantern outside, but the front room of the cabin still had dark shadowy corners. Stanley took a second lantern and tied it to an old light fixture hanging from the ceiling. The room lit up as if under sunlight, but a cold light that gave the room a bare and unwelcome feel. I busied myself clearing a space on the floor beside the black pot-belly stove at the rear of the room. Stanley and Harry stood as statues, staring up at the wall behind me. I turned. Etched in black soot onto the blank wall was some kind of monster. Long-limbed and with an elongated skull. It stared back at us through white blobs left clear of black. I took a step back and almost stumbled. What is that? I didn't need an answer. You don't live and work up in the mountains here without hearing the stories. Stories told dismissively by daylight, like you would talk about the monsters you imagined hiding in your closet as a kid. By night and around a campfire the stories take on a graver tone, and the name of the monster is only ever whispered. Wendigo. Of course I had never seen one. But if I had to imagine what one might look like, the painting in soot taking up the full height of the wall of the cabin was an exact match. I waited for one of the two men behind me to dismiss what we saw drawn on the wall. To make light of it and crack a joke. Neither did. Stanley uttered a simple instruction. No one goes outside without a weapon. Our shadows danced on the walls. The lantern hanging from the ceiling did not move. Stanley leaned and looked out the window. The lantern hanging from the tree branch swung back and forth like the pendulum of a grandfather clock. There was wind tonight, but not enough to do that. Stanley bent down and fished a rifle from the bag. My heart beat like a drum in my ears. And then something else. Whispers. What sounded like the whispers of a girl, entreating us, inviting us out into the darkness of the forest. Stanley inched open the door with the muzzle of his rifle. He stepped through the gap and watched the lantern on the tree come to a rest. He stood beside the lantern and searched the corners of the forest illuminated by the light. Nothing moved. Harry unclipped the leather strap on his belt and drew a pistol and went to the doorway. I felt naked and exposed with my hands empty. I took a step backwards, the Wendigo drawn in soot looming large behind and burning a hole in the back of my head. A shadow flashed through the trees and Stanley swung the muzzle of the rifle and shot, the crack piercing the night. He raised the rifle to his shoulder and flicked it from side to side, searching for movement. The lantern bobbed up and down. With a rush, a long-limbed creature dropped onto Stanley from above. He screamed and wrenched the rifle around but had it knocked from his grip. Harry fired 2 shots and the creature let out a wail. It bounded towards the door and Harry slammed it shut. He pointed the pistol to the closed door and emptied the chamber. Harry took a step back and shot me a glance. Through the whole ordeal I had not moved. I had barely breathed. Was it dead? Was Stanley okay? The window, I screamed. The long thin fingers of the creature wrapped themselves around the inside of the window frame. Then the head appeared, uncannily human-like but distorted and disfigured. The chin elongated and the teeth like razors and drenched in blood. Its eyes white and piercing. Just like the etching on the wall. Harry grabbed me by the arm and hauled me into the back room of the cabin. He slammed shut the flimsy door. The back room was windowless and the only light was a thin strip at the base from the lantern in the front room. We crouched together, our shoulders pressed against the door. We listened. The light patter of footsteps. 2 thin strips of black interrupted the strip of light at the base of the door. Something stood on the other side. "Come out, it is okay." It sounded like Stanley. Had he killed it? "Come out." Harry straightened and I grabbed his shoulder. "Don't open the door," I whispered. "They say a Wendigo can imitate those it kills." My hand brushed against Harry's back and knocked the flashlight from his jacket pocket. I fumbled in the darkness until I found it and I flicked it on. I scanned the room for something, anything we could use as a weapon. I walked away from the door and kicked at the twigs and leaves on the floor. All that was good for was kindling. Something smelled rotten. There must be a dead rat somewhere. "It's Stanley," Harry said. I pointed the torch to him. His eyes were wide and wild. He must have killed it. He smiled at me and took a step back. The door slammed open and carried with it the rotten stench. What stood in the doorway was not Stanley, but the Wendigo. Harry kneeled before it, breathing in the noxious fumes. I shone the torch onto the creature. Its gray skin pulled tight on a gaunt frame. And then something glinted. A belt buckle. Around the creature's waist was the bright blue belt Sabrina wore in the Polaroid. "Sabrina?" I said. It turned to me and paused, tilting its head to the side. I thought I saw a glimmer of recognition, a brief moment where it knew the name. But then it snarled, its mouth opening wide and dripping with saliva. It wrapped 2 hands around the neck of Harry and leaned in. I acted instinctively, without thinking. I jumped at the creature, swinging the only weapon I had, the torch. I brought it down on its head with all the strength and adrenaline I had. It bucked and sent me flying into the front room beyond. I threw out my hands against the fall and grabbed the lantern Stanley had hung from the ceiling. It could not bear my weight and the cord pulled out from the ceiling and I fell with a thud. I jumped up at a burst of warmth from my stomach. The lantern had smashed on impact and a white-hot filament broke free of its casing. I groaned in pain and the creature lumbered forwards. I retreated into the corner of the room and pulled my knees up to my chest. It stood over me and opened its mouth, razor-sharp teeth gleaming white. Then the smell of smoke. The creature hopped and then scrambled backwards. The leaves and twigs covering the floor ignited under the heat from the lamp filament. A small flame burst up and the creature covered its face. Fire. It didn't like fire. I crawled forwards and swept as much of the kindling as I could grab onto the flames. The fire grew and the creature screamed. As smoke filled the room, it coughed and spluttered. It made one last effort to come at me and then retreated out of the room and into the forest. I went to the back room and grabbed Harry. We stumbled out of the cabin, the fire now spreading up the walls and to the roof. Stanley lay below the lantern hung from the tree, unmoving and with a chunk of flesh missing from his throat. We ran into the forest in the opposite direction the creature had gone. We first climbed up to the crest and then back down the mountain. We stumbled our way down by the light of the torch. Adrenaline coursed through our veins and we imagined that thing right behind us, stalking us in the dark. When we finally crossed a trail, we followed it back down to the ranger station. A team of police and National Guard hiked up to the cabin after the sun rose. The cabin had burned to the ground, the pot-belly stove the only item that survived the blaze. The bodies of Stanley and Freddie were brought down. They said Stanley's flesh had been picked clean down to the skeleton. That was the first day of September, 1989. Sabrina was listed as a missing person and her father spent a month in the mountains searching for her. But she's gone in every sense that matters. Turned to a Wendigo by hunger for human flesh. She transformed into something unrecognizable from where it began. Around campfires people still tell stories of the Wendigo. I don't know if they truly believe they are out there. But I know, I have seen it. Sometimes there really is a monster in the closet. Third story. This story was shared by you/Dr. Alwayscared. The Wendigo is near. This is a story which happened to me and my friend a few years back. I work in a national park as a park ranger. When my life was relatively normal, I had just landed a job at a national park. Life was good as I was working with my buddy Rob. The second day was strange. We found bear traps on the ground, we never put them there. Other than that, another day in paradise, but throughout the night, I swear I heard a loud screech coming from the woods near my watchtower. I looked and saw nothing. I just shrugged it off after a little while. As of lately we have been finding small animal corpses around the woods. This is normal since we have bears all over, it's just that these marks were too big to belong to a bear. What's even weirder is we found a tooth inside of a bloody deer. This tooth was too huge and sharp to belong to a bear. I think we have a new animal in these woods. Today we found a bear, hanging from a tree and gutted. I nearly threw up. No animal in the park could do this. Boss told us from now on to stay at the watchtowers. I kept being reassured that everything would be fine, but at this point I just couldn't be too sure anymore. Lately the screeches have been more frequent. I'm having trouble focusing. When I was younger, I was told of a creature that fed off people and animals. It could also mimic voices. It was called a Wendigo. Of course I don't believe in that paranormal crap, but something was taking out animals throughout the park. I swear I heard Rob call me from outside of my watchtower. He yelled, "Hey Trent, you have got to come see this." I nearly left, but I just felt that his voice was off, nearly distorted. I looked out of my watchtower, to see Rob, his insides dangling in the breeze. My boss ruled this out as an accident. That still didn't stop the police from questioning me. I know I heard his voice. I saw something in the woods. Let me explain. This creature I saw had huge antlers, an animal skull as a mask, and it was over 11 feet tall. The night began normally, until the screeches began again. I looked down, only to see this creature, eating my boss's lifeless body. I got a good look at it before it ran off and out of sight. The police have been very suspicious of me lately. How could they not be? Both of the people I worked with are dead. I tried to explain what I saw to the police. Of course nobody believed me. It all led to me being terminated. I've decided I'm not going to let this creature ruin my life. I have done research on this Wendigo. I plan to break into the park tonight. I will end this, I must. I'm in the park, I hear the screeches and I am following them. I hear the voices of my boss and Rob. They are telling me that they are okay and I should come meet them by my watchtower. I know from my research that the Wendigo creature is really good at tricking people. I just kept wandering around the park. I was wondering, until I heard my mother's voice. She died when I was 6. My instincts told me no, but I had missed her so much. Don't worry Mom, I'm coming. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/traditional Tao. We survived a Wendigo attack. I'm happy to see others also had these experiences. It's a bit like group therapy, in a very twisted way I guess. This isn't an AA meeting or anything. Years ago, when I was fresh out of high school, me and my friends went for a camping trip, since it'd be the last time we saw each other before college sent us on our separate ways. We had planned to go deep into the national forest in the mountains, and just enjoy ourselves for a few weeks. My friends who came along were Preston, a Native American who had several years of survivalist strategies under his belt. Jamie, a hunting and gun enthusiast like me, with a propensity for adventure. Mark, Preston's friend, not so much mine. He smoked a lot of drugs and seemed to be okay, but I was always on edge around him. With us we packed 2 tents, dried fruit, rice, jerky, camping supplies, and beer, along with a Mini 14 rifle, a Saiga 12 shotgun, 2 pistols, my Taurus Judge revolver, and Jamie's .357 revolver. We packed all of this into my battered BMW station wagon, with me being the driver. Stopping at a car park, we loaded up our gear on our backs and began going deep into the forest. The first day was uneventful. Preston found a good clearing for us to settle at. We set down our gear and set up the tents while Preston got to work with a cook fire. I was always good at setting up tents, so this wasn't a problem for me. Within 20 minutes, we had set up the basics of camp. I cracked open a beer and sat next to Preston, who had created a roaring fire. I smiled at him. "I'm gonna miss you, man." I patted his back. "Me too." "Let's enjoy this," he responded. Jamie and Mark were carrying on, exploring the surrounding area. At the time, I could have sworn I saw a pair of green eyes and antlers looking at me. I would come to regret not asking Preston in the coming days. I tried to forget as we sat down to dinner that night. Campfire curry, a mix of curry spices, frozen chicken we brought and prepared, and a few vegetables, along with a small pot of rice. As it was the first night, we ate all of our perishables. It was tasty for sure. Then, like we were kids once again, we roasted marshmallows and made s'mores. It was truly a very fun time, for sure. If only it would have lasted. That night was uneventful as well. I slept like a baby, and Preston, whom I shared a tent with, didn't seem to be bothered at all. The next morning, we packed up camp, and decided to head south, towards a large river with the intent of spending a few nights riverside. As we were in the remote wilderness, I handed Preston my Mini 14, and I myself carried the Saiga 12, slugs and buckshot alternated in its 10-round magazine. Jamie kept his .357, and I had my sidearm as well. We walked for what seemed like hours. The mistiness, overcast weather and lack of clear landmarks required we rely on GPS and compasses. As we headed south, I saw the look on Preston's face. He looked worried. "Preston, what's up, man?" I asked him. He had me get close and he whispered, "I dunno, man, I got a feeling that a bad omen is about to pass. Keep everyone in sight. I'll listen for anything." As he said that, we heard what sounded like a distant whooping noise. All of us looked around. In the distance behind us, I could have sworn I saw something shambling. It was too far to shoot with my shotgun, so I pointed at it and told Preston to shoot. "Shoot that thing." 3 shots from the Mini 14, and the smell of freshly fired ammunition filled my nostrils. Whatever it was got down on all fours and bounded away. "What was that?" Mark asked, shocked. Preston swore up and down in his native language, before he finally said, "That, my friends, is something truly evil. We need to hurry to the river." We ran for about 30 minutes, our pace slowed by the amount of heavy gear we carried. Preston looked from side to side, but found nothing as he did so. Soon, we reached the rushing river, and with that the fog seemed to dissipate. Preston looked around, shook his head, looked at his GPS and finally said, "The other side of the national forest is available to us across a hand tram a mile upstream. We can make it there before lunchtime if we hurry." "Preston, what's going on? What was that thing?" Jamie asked, concerned. "I can't be sure, but it's nothing good. I want to try and lose it across the tramway. Whatever that thing is, if it's anything like my family stories, it won't ford a river. We're going, that's final." Preston led the way upriver, keeping close to the shoreline. Eventually, we did find it. A large steel and wood car suspended over a wide expanse of river. I got in first, and wasted no time getting across. I watched the trail on the other side while Jamie went across next with some of the extra gear, and then finally Preston and Mark squeezed into the tram and got across. As I turned to leave, I saw Preston take out his bowie and he began hacking at the rope suspending the tram. "What the fuck are you doing, man? That's state property, that's a felony," I said, bewildered. "We can't have that thing follow us." He hacked at the rope until it snapped and the tram car fell with a loud clang into the river below. As we left and started heading east, I could have sworn I saw those green eyes again, but just for a moment, watching us. We made camp at a clearing on the edge of a hills-wide ridge. It gave us great views and visibility, but more importantly, as Preston stated, we can see anyone or anything coming. As he sat and made the fire he said, "We're doing watch rotations. That thing, I am genuinely afraid of it. I bet it's just a bear, Preston. Too many family stories." Mark guffawed. As I said previously, he was Preston's, not my, friend. I took the second watch, after Preston cooked a meal of rice pudding. I had no trouble staying up. Then Jamie. I sat up and talked with him for a while. He worried a little, and he expressed that he wanted to go home. "I know what you mean, dude. This is too creepy." Mark took the last watch, my shotgun propped up next to the tent in case he needed it, or so Jamie told me. When we got up the next morning, Mark had disappeared. Immediately, we questioned Jamie, whose story checked out. He saw Mark up and watching. We waited, Preston reigniting the few vapors. He also pulled out a small can of pine tar and began making torches. "What are they for, Preston?" Jamie asked. I'm sure of it, we've got a Wendigo. Preston replied. A Wendigo? The fuck is that? I replied. A cannibalistic demon with green eyes, a deer skull for a head, and a thirst for human blood. They're also like skinwalkers, you know, like in True Blood. At the time, the TV show was popular. He explained. I became very scared, so that grabbed Mark and ate him. We'll wait for Mark for a few hours. Keep the guns locked and loaded. Do not let him approach within 200 feet of the campsite. I'm going out for a bit. You're crazy, Preston. I protested. He whispered in my ear, when I come back, ask me my favorite sailor. It's Saturn, for the record. He then approached Jamie and told him something that I knew I wasn't supposed to hear. Then he grabbed 2 torches, his knife, and he turned back to us. Wendigo do not like fire. Keep the fire going, there's plenty of sticks and wood right there for a few hours. I'll be back. Do not forget what I told each of you. If I can't answer it when I come back, shoot me. As he disappeared into the forest, I sat with Jamie, back to back. He had my Saiga, I had my Mini 14. For hours, we heard various sounds in the forest, including those whooping noises, the sound of what sounded like Mark, and what I thought was the sound of a distantly beating drum. By afternoon, we heard rustling in the forest, and none other than Preston returned, dirt smeared on his face, and a makeshift drum under his arm, with 1 torch left. He stopped short of the campsite when I raised my gun at him. What's this about, guys? It's me, Preston, he said. What is your favorite Final Fantasy protagonist? Jamie asked. Squall, of course. Jamie lowered his gun. What is your favorite sailor? I asked slowly and deliberately. Saturn, of course. I suppose this means Mark is still missing, yes, he responded. I lowered my gun and said, come on up, dude. And yeah, we heard whooping noises but no sign. Preston averted his gaze, it's hunting us. I confirmed the tracks, and my little serenade in tribal chants caused it to at one point come and look at me. How did you get away? I asked. I chased it with fire. They're afraid of it, remember, he responded. Do guns harm them? I asked slowly. It can injure them, but you really need fire or silver. We only have fire, as usual. We're going to burn one of the tents and drop some gear. We're going light. We're heading to the highway. It's 35 miles to the east, but we can get there over 2 days. But we'll need to double our night rotations. And if you see anything that looks like Mark, he's dead, guys. I'm sure of it. Preston responded. I was very afraid at this point. The sinking feeling that my idea could have gotten everyone killed. I took charge. We will do 15 miles today, and 20 tomorrow. We will hitch a ride back to the car. We'll burn our trash as we move. We'll burn the tent tomorrow morning. Let's go, now. We hastily packed what we could carry, and burned much of our non-essentials. We hurried throughout the afternoon and early evening, running when we could and walking as quickly as we could. The whooping call continued to seem to follow us at a distance. I didn't, however, see antlers or green eyes when I looked back. Eventually, we found a clearing that was decently sized, had good visibility and sticks. We hastily gathered firewood, all staying as a group, and we pitched camp. That dinner was cold jerky and dried fruit. Preston was unwilling to attract attention from smells, but he did create several pine tar torches and set them at the outskirts. We didn't say a word, but me and Preston took the first watch. Then Jamie and Preston, then me and Jamie. This continued every 2 hours until the daytime. As day broke, we heard screaming. Mark's voice came from the woods crying for help. Preston shook his head, it got him. We can't do anything about it. We burned that tent, and continued traveling throughout the day. I could see it, today, though. It didn't bother to hide itself by noon. The Wendigo was about 7 feet tall. Its limbs were blackened, 2 glowing green eyes set into a deer skull with antlers. Soft whooping noises. It kept its distance. I pulled my revolver, and aimed at it, about 250 feet away. Firing, I hit it in the chest. It barely flinched. The thing turned and stared at me. Preston began to shout at it aggressively in his native language. It stopped, tilted its head, and then responded to him. I asked him, "What the hell did he say to you?" I asked him what he did with Mark. He responded, "Who's that?" Preston then grabbed my Mini 14 and fired repeatedly at him. This abomination seemed to get annoyed. I followed up with a well-placed slug to the chest from my Saiga. It howled in pain and dashed away into the woods. "We better run, I think," I remarked to the group. We ran for a good 20 minutes, when suddenly, in a clearing ahead of us, was a human silhouette. Naked, filthy. "Guys, it's me. You gotta take me back, I escaped that thing and have been running from it for the last day." It was Mark. I pointed my Saiga at Mark. "What happened to your clothes, Mark?" "Yeah, and if you're Mark, tell us the name of the school we went to," Preston said. He pointed the rifle at his head. "Come on guys, don't play around, it's me. I'm cold, I'm hungry, and I want to go home," he protested. Jamie shoot him in the leg with his revolver. Mark screamed in pain, "Unless you want the next to be your head, answer the fucking questions," Jamie shouted. That's when Mark's head snapped to Jamie, in a grossly unnatural fashion. I was paralyzed by fear as it appeared as if Mark was contorting and screaming in unnatural tones. I fired, repeatedly. All remaining shells in the magazine. It just seemed to shred the upper skin. Putting that on my back, I remembered, Wendigos hate fire. I grabbed my lighter and a can of bug spray, and I dashed at the thing that was once Mark, spraying it with the fire from my makeshift flamethrower. As I burned it, Preston laid down 2 entire magazines into it and then dumped the rest of his pine tar on it, and Jamie emptied his revolver. When it finally stopped screaming and moving, we were left with a mutilated and charred corpse, half Mark, half Wendigo. We all threw up. Preston began to butcher its corpse and said, "I've got to destroy the corpse. It's only right that I do this." For an hour, Preston burned and cut up the corpse, then cut the heart out. He put it in a plastic bag and then shoved it into his jacket. It took us another few hours to reach the highway. Preston sat and began to cry on the sidewalk as Jamie kept a hitchhiker thumb out. I sat next to him and asked, "What are you gonna do with the heart?" 5th story. This story was shared by you/Amanda Alley. Wendigo in my backyard. It was late night. My now boyfriend, I'll call him Jake, and I were getting ready to sleep in an acquaintance's playhouse in her backyard. The structure is about 5 by 8 with 3 windows and a fence directly next to one of the windows. The windows are large and close to the ground. Suddenly, I noticed 2 shadowy figures through the cracks in the fence. I see what appears to be two people standing very close to the fence, about 1.5 feet away from the playhouse. This is near the alley. One is about 5 feet 9 inches and the other 5 feet 2 inches. No details were visible, just silhouettes. Fearing the cops were after him, Jake hides under the blanket and goes to sleep. I grab my knife and begin my vigil, because something told me that wasn't what was out there. Then, the scratching at the bottom of the wall begins. Whatever this was circled the playhouse and aggressively scratched, darn near constantly. It sounded like the size of a raccoon, but I could not, despite every effort, catch a glimpse. This was bizarre. I spent about 2 hours listening to this creature sometimes make slow circles, sometimes very quick. I heard it walk on the tiny porch. Meanwhile, the larger figures outside the fence move just enough to know they are alive, but never step away from where they were standing. At first, I was paralyzed with fear. This was until I figured that whatever this was, may well smell weakness. So I summoned up every ounce of the willpower I never knew I had. After a bit of wrestling with primal terror, I was calm and ready to fight. Although a bit angry at these fuckers that were invading my property, fence is offset from the alley so there is a nook of grass not visible from much elsewhere. The small creature walked over to the door and seemed to be pawing and sniffing, causing the hinges to rattle, desperately wanting to get to us for whatever reason. The way the window was angled, I should have been able to see it. The only gap in my sight was about the size of a rat. After living in a tent for some time, I know what rats sound like. This one would have to have been extremely rabid and raged out to maintain this loudness and not give up. We had no food or aromatic drinks. Rabid rats at that stage would tend to blunder, and this thing was doing anything but that. It was focused. Also, it didn't make any noise other than scratching. I would expect hissing, or at least an errant squeak. This continues for around an hour. Sometimes I move around and look out at weird angles trying to determine what the hell this is. Jake, lucky enough he is a heavy sleeper and was under a lot of blankets so didn't wake up. Later, the sounds got steadily louder and started expanding, for lack of a better word. That crescendoed in aggressive scratching completely surrounding the playhouse, all the walls and roof, from more points than I could count. Still able to see nothing. My psyche was on fire, but not with fear somehow. I accepted death. I became euphoric for a few minutes as I figured I should enjoy my last time on Earth. The blazing joy faded, but I remained calm and happy. The scratching calmed down, and after about half an hour, it petered out. The figures outside the fence were gone, but they hadn't been for long. I didn't see them leave because I was probably watching out one of the other windows. I woke up Jake because I wanted the help of a man to be on alert and defensive, because I thought they hadn't gone far yet. We had been good friends for a couple years. At that time, him and I had been growing closer romantically, but only for a bit more than a week. I swallowed my pride because now or never was the time for the truth, and said, "I love you." He said it back, and I was so relieved and happy. I racked my brain, and neither him nor I can think of any logical explanation other than a creature not yet known to science. He heard the scratching before he fell asleep, but at that point it wasn't alarming. He agreed that it was about 4 hours from when he fell asleep to when he woke up. The scratching never ceased for more than a minute or two during that time. On another night when he was camping with his friend, he heard aggressive, loud, and unexplainable noises of a much more dramatic nature, but this is a story for another time. Suffice to say, we believe there are cunning, hungry beasts with vocal, athletic, and sensory capabilities beyond imagination. These and other errant bizarre sounds remind us of stories of Wendigos. I dread to think, but the figures outside the fence I could have just been one, the shorter one being the hind legs and the taller one being the front. The top of the figures were in shadow. If that is the case, it could have been throwing its voice and creating the scratching noises itself. 3 creatures or 1. Theoretically, it could have been a rabid rat that just happened against all odds to stay out of sight, and I went into psychosis when I heard it all around me. But neither I nor my family has any history of hallucinations. I believe that I remain too composed to imagine such a thing. The figures could have been cops after him or robbers hiding out coincidentally at the exact time. I don't think so though. Thank God these creatures sensed that we were not to be trifled with and wouldn't go down without a fight. I used to be a scaredy cat about every noise at night. My mindset towards this and life in general has improved since then, because I realize I am capable of much more mental strength than I believed. 6th story. This story was shared by you/Onyx_Ox. I think my mom was cursed by a Wendigo. TW, mentions of animal abuse/dismemberment. Every family member of mine, including myself, has had an encounter with the paranormal or supernatural at one point in their lives. From the little people that kept my great-aunt company as she lay dying in a hospital bed to myself making successful contact with something through a Ouija board. But this I don't have an explanation for. Even as someone who believes in these things, I always try to ration the mundane over the magical. However, after delving into learning more about a certain mythological cryptid, I can only come to one conclusion surrounding my mother's passing in the spring of this year. I used to live in the mountains in Northern California with my mom, who was a single mother, and the place we stayed at was a house that was owned by my aunt. It was a historical house with well over 200 years of history on the property, and being rebuilt and altered through the decades. This house was situated in the thick of the wooded mountain, and forest stretched for miles beyond. In the front ward was a wall about 3 feet high, and on top was a hill that inclined upwards back some 10 yards of grass that terminated at a fence. Beyond that was just woods and a small hiking trail. When we moved into this house, I was just starting 1st grade, and what I'm about to tell of has been happening regularly until we moved out when I was in middle school. My mom was also deeply spiritual and also believed in the supernatural, though I don't think they knew what she had possibly encountered. When I was sent off to school, my mom stayed back at the house to do paperwork for an ongoing custody battle. When she was alone or when I was out of sight was when it started happening. She would hear my voice shouting for her from the front yard, yet she knew that I was not home at that time, nor would I have been. The first few times it happened she wrote it off as her hearing things, since she is hard of hearing in one ear. The longer we lived there, the more seemingly uncomfortable things we would feel or experience. I had never liked that house. I always felt like I was being watched in one way or another. Especially outside, coming from just beyond the property fence. A few times she was with some family friends out on the back porch that overlooked some sparse patches of forest and the valley. She would invite them over when I is at school still, so that she can focus of relaxing. That's when she heard my voice again, calling to her from the wooded patch. This time her friends also heard it. Confused, they asked my mom, shouldn't I have been at school at that time, and why was I playing outside in the woods? I wasn't, she told them that. At the same time, around the times that my mom supposedly heard my voice, a foul smell would linger around the property. When I would come home, or find my mom if I was off inside the house, my mom would keep asking me if I was really at school today and I didn't just skip school. I always answered honestly that I was at school. The most vivid memory that my mom had of an encounter with an unwelcomed friend on/around our property was one night in 2014, when I was in 4th grade, a magnitude 6 earthquake hit an adjacent county. Our property was very close to that county and she was literally shaken awake. Note, the bedroom we were sleeping in had the bed right next to a glass sliding door that faced to the backyard. She tried to wake me up but I was a heavy sleeper. Then, she smelled that foul scent again. 2 yellow eyes in our backyard caught her eyes. As she stared at this intruder in our backyard, the aftershock hit. Thankfully we were far enough away from the epicenter that the only damage done to the property was a crack in the tiles of the backyard deck and also along the floor surrounding a pool we had. Another incident was that we used to keep chickens for eggs for a few months. We had the family handyman build an automatic closing coop so that the door would close just before sunset. To keep the chickens safe from mountain lions and other things that would eat chickens. Along with a metal fenced, not the chicken wire kind but the heavy-duty ones that are used in construction sites, coop on all sides including the top to keep out the mountain lions since a few were recently spotted north the nearby regional park. This was something that came from my own memory. At first it was just one chicken that ended up drowned at the bottom of our pool. After that we put a padlock on the gate to the coop. Then one late morning I was out hunting for frogs in the pool filter when I saw my aunt, mom, and family handyman, the same one that built the coop, look at the coop shocked and worried. The metal fencing of the coop of one safe had been completely ripped open and inside the coop was a bloodbath. I came to take a closer look at the scene when I heard the handyman say, "I'm not sure this was a mountain lion. None of the chicken are eaten or missing. Their heads are all severed, and a mountain lion would have eaten these. They don't hunt and kill for fun." We also had no neighbors or people for at least a few miles that could have played this prank on us. And the thing I remember most was not the dismembered chickens but the smell of rotting flesh even though the chicken looked like they were just killed the night before. Looking back it felt like we were being taunted by this thing. Or at least my mom was for some reason. When we still lived at that house and even after we moved, misfortune followed us wherever we went. My mom got into a 5-year-long abusive relationship and developed breast cancer when I was in high school. She was a very healthy woman with no family history of breast cancer and it would go away and come back just when she thought she was finally done with the chemo and treatment and all that. I had at some point in my teens gotten into cryptids and specifically Native American folklore. If what I assume about her experiences are correct, I have heard that even if you evade death by the Wendigo, it will find another way to kill you. Doctors she would visit would express confusion as she was low risk in getting breast cancer let alone having it keep coming back since they caught it early the first time. Though we had long left that house, it felt like the memories, the fear, it was always following her. In her last months alive when I was with her, she said she kept having dreams of that old house. Of my voice from beyond the woods, beckoning for her to come. Dreams about a thing that looked like a man but wasn't exactly, bearing the same yellow glowing eyes she saw outside the night of the earthquake. She felt as if these reoccurring dreams were trying to tell her something. She had hoped it was something good and not malevolent. In fact it did have my voice after all. Last year in the fires, the house burnt down. And this year in the spring, my mom passed away. Looking back it feels like the pieces fit together for this. Everything from her diagnosis to how her cancer had behaved felt so off. It could be that she was cursed by this thing. Or maybe there was no supernatural explanation. But it still lingers in the back of my mind. 7th story. This story was shared by you/Spazzies_here. I survived a Wendigo. This isn't the first story. The first one will be posted after this. My apologies. I've been hidden for a while now. You know that feeling of your home being the safest place on earth, as if it was an impenetrable fortress? It's a foreign feeling. Well, as it turns out, it only resides when you feel as if there is a trust between you and nature. And when you have broken that wall with an entity, you've lost the feeling. The happiest feeling of them all, safety. My home was a sanctuary at one point. You could confide in it for days, if you wished. The feeling of comfort would draw people in like a compass towards the north. But it's gone now. It's foreign, as I said. You take it for granted, and when it's gone it's utterly crippling. You have to hide, you have to run, just to try to find solace in a place that has none. It's in my house. The feeling is gone and it's in my house. I've been hiding in my cleaning closet for around 2 hours, pretty sure, and I don't know how long else this will last as the thing, the Wendigo, is out for my blood, in my own house. I'll elaborate, but I don't have much time. Last week it started with the taunting. The hello s and the jack s still bumbling around in my mind as I type. The beast taunted me. Its bravado-packed lungs wanted to tease me and get me to move from sanctuary to catch a kill, and that doesn't make me scared, it just pisses me off. It started with the taunting while I was camping, and when I got fed up, I yelled back at it, and many reverb voices came and yelled right back at me, including my dead elderly neighbor, its early prey. Then it followed me. I screamed at it, I shot at it, and I ran home, as it was the safest place for me. And I wasted all the ammo on the damn kill. I sat there, for whatever feels like forever ago now, in front of my door, blocking it. But the creature is smart, found a way onto my leveraged patio, and glazed in my window. Then came the tapping. The slow consistent tink-tink-tink on the glass. It was soft, and the monster crouched down to not peer in the window, but the tapping, it was worse. It grew, slowly rising from the soft tink-tink-tink to thuds against the glass, slowly cracking the canvas from the middle out, until I heard it. Hello. The glass crumbled. It crawled, and within the next second, the shards distinctly crunching under the weight of the thing. By this point I had my back turned, behind the door, so I had no visuals. The only thing guiding me to that thing was the soft smushing of the carpet under its feet, leading directly to the closet I was in. I leaned against the thin door as if it were a shield against a cascade of arrows, clinging my last hope tightly. It made it to the door. I heard it take a deep long breath in. Then out. It leaned in close, and sniffed. Repeat a couple more times, and he was on his way. He went over to my room door, which was across the hall. I heard the inhale, a stuttering one this time, since he was sniffing. He took a pause. It felt like he debated for a moment. I opened the closet door a tiny crack to instigate what he had stopped for. He had his head tilted. Then took a step back, and rammed the door with his antlers. I jumped at the noise alone, as he hit the door fairly hard. I looked back to see him rearing himself up to go at it again, and I focused on his antlers. They still looked splintered, as if he took on a tornado and landed headfirst onto his antlers from 100 feet up in the air. It looked as if when he took another ramming to the door, the antlers would crumble on impact, and so when he bowed his head, and took a lunge forward, and broke through the door, I was surprised. The door had a hole in it now, he had wriggled out of it a second earlier. The door had a hole, and to accompany it, the door bent inwards towards the hall, near the left upper corner, so much that the pole bit holding the hinge parts together, and broke it to the extent that there was an inch of room between the two halves. He wrung 3 of his fingers into the gap of the door hinge, and another 4 into the hole. He bent forward, and pulled swift and fast, tearing the door from its hinges and breaking the overlapping frame with it. Preceding this, the beast stuck his head in, towards an angle so his antlers didn't get caught in the hole where the door used to be. I was scared he found a scent trail of my stuff, since he could then find me based off my scent. He went inside the room, and around 30 seconds of him sniffing around, he started rummaging. I thought I heard a low, raspy, "See you here. Yo, you are here." As if he was talking to himself, muttering. I slowly shut the crack of the door I was behind, and as soon as I had fully done so, I heard it. There were 2 thuds, then a smash and crumble of the glass. I looked out of the reimbursed crack I made. He escaped. He smashed my window and escaped. Not only was I scared, now I was scared and pissed off, because now I have this damn thing taunting me like I'm its prey. In which I will not be. I'm going to leave this segment off here. I need to pack. I need to prepare for the inevitable, and I'm going to kill that damned beast. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.